right. Well, thanks, Karl, Dockstader, for coming back on. I think this is the third time you've been on the show. So we thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on and talk about this important discussion, or this important topic that really needs to be had by all people in Ontario, the 905, and I think Canada as a whole. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm working towards my five timers jacket, right? I get an official 905ers five timers jacket with the
Let me
fifth
talk to the
appearance.
boss. Let me talk to the boss, and we'll see what we can make happen.
By the boss, you don't mean Roland. You mean Mrs. Joel.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, and also I should say, because this is our first episode of the new year, so happy New Year to you, and all the best for a good prosperous 2023 for you.
Yeah, Hoya and Noya, happy New Year's for sure.
Unfortunately, over the course of the New Year's holiday, tragedy kind of struck in and around the 905, with Constable Pierzchala, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, to his friends and family, was shot and killed in the line of duty, to put it bluntly. We aren't going to discuss the ins and outs of that case. That's an ongoing investigation. Criminal charges will be investigated over time. We're not here to discuss that. What I do want to talk about is a tweet that I saw from you about it, where Halton PD tweeted out the thin blue line logo flag on their Twitter account, and you had a response to that. And I'm wondering, just could you tell us what it is that you tweeted, and also you personally, what does the thin blue line logo, or that statement, mean to you as an Indigenous person in Canada?
Yeah, so I saw, like, first off, if anybody that's connected to Officer Pierzchala in any way is listening, I have to give my utmost condolences, and I mean, I have strong opinions about policing and policing as an institution, in the same way that I have anti-war feelings, but as the son of a veteran, I hate the war, not the soldier. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to policing. I have a lot of respect for people that wear the uniform, though a lot's changed since 2020, and that's what kind of led me to the tweet that I had made. I said in the tweet, as a reaction to seeing the thin blue line that was tweeted from the official Halton Police Services account. That tweet has now been removed. By the way, it's no longer there. But I saw the tweet. Very respectful tweet. Very strong sentiment that I tend to echo, mourning the unnecessary loss of life that happened, but then using a thin blue line imagery over top of the OPP logo. And so that's where, unfortunately, and I wasn't the first person to politicize this issue when it comes to comments that the premier made, and even Thomas Creek, OPP Commissioner Thomas Creek, and in sort of backhanded ways, had made some political commentary. But anyways, I saw the thin blue line, and so I think, like we all do in this day and age, I grabbed my phone and just put together a tweet that said, "My heart aches for Constable Greg Pierzchala's family, friends, and colleagues. His death was wrong. Sharing the thin blue line scares me and scares many non-white people. This distracts from a time when we should be coming together to grieve this loss." And that was it. And I didn't give it much thought. And my tweets these days are getting dozens of likes, which makes me very happy. One or two retweets, usually Sean, my radio bestie, and then we'll retweet it from our official One Dish One Mic account. But this got a little bit of attention, both negative and positive.
So, I guess you and I come from very different backgrounds, and I'll be honest, when I see the thin blue line, I understand there's controversy around it from the BIPOC community, but it does mean something different to me as a white man in this country. I have at best a passing indifference to it when I see it. I understand, and I'm trying to what I want to do with this podcast episode is kind of open that door and open that dialogue to just really understand. Your reaction is very much different from mine. I mean, I'm at best neutral on it. When you see it, and I assume other people in the BIPOC communities see it, what's your initial reaction when you see that logo or that terminology used? Just can you kind of give us like your first 3 seconds, your first gut instinct when you see that?
A fear, without hesitation. Police in general scare me. I mean, I've been recently wrongfully arrested. That's what we talked about the last time
Right.
I was on the show. We seeing everything that happened with finally some awareness around how I hope we all agree now that Black Lives Matter, and that was disputed before 2020, but it now seems that that's shifted into the popular convention, that everybody acknowledges that Black Lives Matter. There's a reason that expression has gained a certain level of traction, and there's an acknowledgement that it's because Black lives haven't mattered, and in the United States, but unfortunately also in Canada, police forces over incarcerate, over arrest, and ultimately exhibit too much lethality towards Black people, Indigenous people, and generally non-white people. So it's fear. It's automatic fear when I see a cop in and of themselves, and I have to deal with cops in my job in the radio. My former job with the Friendship Center involved me dealing with police on a regular basis. I will get past that fear, understanding that there's a person behind the uniform, and I will be able to see the person. The uniform itself is still scary, but then as soon as I see that patch on the uniform, the defiant way that the Calgary Police Service is continuing to wear the patches on their uniforms in spite of directives from local politicians to do otherwise, it scares me, and I directly connect it to the lethality of this. This is one of the only occupations that has to carry a firearm everywhere they go, everything they do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in what you said, and we're going to try and do that. I'm going to take the opposite side in that, I'm going to give the Halton PD the benefit of the doubt in that they didn't post that in a sense of antagonistic. I'm definitely don't think it was a matter of like we're better than white not non-white citizens. What I think it was a matter of solidarity to show we understand the inherent dangers of the profession of policing. This is unfortunately a real threat in that line of work. And Constable Pierzchala did pay the ultimate price in the line of his duty, and it's a tragedy on all levels. And I want to say that's where it came from a sense of love, honor, and respect for Officer Pierzchala and the other officers who do this daily work. There are people who are listening to say, yeah, that's what the thin blue line means to me. That's what it means. I want to show respect and honor for the men and women who put their lives on the line. And just can you give us your thoughts on that point of view? That there are people that's probably shouting into the radio right now as they're listening to this podcast. Say that's what the thin blue line means to me. You can't take that away from me. Can you maybe just give your statement on that?
Yeah, I don't mind answering that. When I tweeted, I got a range of tweets, some mostly supportive tweets, but I did actually, the president of our local Niagara Regional Police Association replied to the tweet, Patrick McGilly, and he said he's replying on his behalf, not on behalf of the police, the Niagara Regional Police Service, or the Niagara Regional Police Association, that he's the president of. But Patrick McGilly said, Karl, I'm saddened that you feel that way about a blue line with 2 black lines on each side. I'll be more than happy to meet with you and discuss my personal perspective on the symbol that represents sisterhood, brotherhood, and the sadness we feel for those who sacrificed for us. And I I thought about it, and I thought, well, this is an officer coming from a genuine place and talking about their heartfelt loss. And I'll never know what it's like to be a police officer and to feel the pain of a fallen colleague. I've lost, unfortunately, I've lost colleagues at work. And so, I mean, I know that pain, and I know the sense of family that you have at work, and I don't want to deny that to people. But I'm not sure if I'm going to take the meeting or not with Officer McGilly, because I also feel that when when you're in certain types of service, you have a responsibility to have certain levels of knowledge. So are there 905ers that are out there that think, oh, the thin blue line is just a way of one officer honoring another officer? I think that's fair, at least before this podcast, that perspective is out there. But officers themselves, I think, have a responsibility to understand the systemic forces at play in police services. The fact that police services specifically have been used as tools of colonialism, tools to oppress indigenous peoples, that officers themselves, and predominantly in the United States, but Canada is not immune to anti-Black racism that's directly connected to police services. And so for officers, and particularly for the Halton Police Service, to post the thin blue line, listen, more than how you see fit. I don't want to take that away from you, but leaders in indigenous communities such as myself, leaders in Black communities across Canada, coast to coast, including Black Lives Matter leadership and beyond, have said that this symbol has become associated with white supremacy. This symbol stems from a racist police chief in LA back in the 1950s. Like there's a generation plus of history of this. So I don't, for the general public, I'll buy ignorance as a defense for officers. I think they agree to uphold a higher standard of responsibility when they put on the uniform. So I don't accept as a blanket argument from any officer that I didn't know. If I'm telling you that as a non-white person I'm associating the symbol with white supremacy, and then if you are, after hearing that, still choosing to use it, to wear it, to show it, even in this time of mourning, I think it's a weak argument at best.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, because I wasn't sure how I was going to segue into this, but you brought it up, so give me threw the door open for me. But you're right. I mean, that we do see the thin blue line. You see it being used, for example, at during the truck convoy to Ottawa. You see it used in far right circles more and more. And again, I'm a white man, so I don't have this. It doesn't have the same emotional resonance with me. But I can imagine, there's something you said, but like those, even if you use the symbol in a sense of love and respect, it's being co-opted by those who want to use it as a tool of power and subjugation. And I think it's akin to right now, in far right circles, we hear about people using the red ensign, the flag that was flown by Canadian Armed Forces during the First and Second World War, before you had the maple leaf as the flag. We're hearing more and more like it's being co-opted by Proud Boys and far right elements as a symbol for them. Is there a way maybe to take back? Because I think that the onus is on the rest of us to kind of take back those symbols and say these symbols are meant for all of us, or they're meant to be used in a symbol of honor and respect and love. And I'm wondering, is there a way for us to take back the thin blue line symbol and say, so that it is universal for all people in this country, as a sign of respect for those who give their lives, for all Canadians, not just a certain segment of Canadians?
It's tough. I mean, I think before now it might have been possible. Before 2020, it may have been possible. But it's sort of like if you're asking your teacher for an opportunity to do a makeup assignment, and if it's the first time you approach your teacher and say, "Hey, listen, can I have a little bit of extra time to get my mark up or to get a passing grade?" And if it's the first time that you do it, your teacher is likely to say, depending on the teacher, I think an exception can be made because you've generally exhibited good habits. I would say that when it comes to the police and honestly Canada at large, or broader Canadian culture, I would say that there's been plenty of opportunity before now to try to establish these symbols to represent other values, but there was just such an overwhelming of a barrage of information really in the last decade, but even in the last couple of years, where it's been shown that time and time again, these police forces have operated with a certain level of impunity. They still do to a certain degree. Again, I referenced the Calgary police force, who's been told by Black leaders in Calgary and been told by the political branch, listen, the symbol is no longer neutral. We're telling you openly that the symbol is no longer neutral. And so afterwards to go and to use it, I think it's why, again, I can't speak for the Halton Police Service, but I think it's why they chose to pull the symbol down. And it's surely not because of my tweet, but tweets like my tweet that gave them the message that they need to express this differently. And I love what the community members of Caledonia did. I watched a video on the local news there where a bunch of the moms and community members in Caledonia were tying blue ribbons to the fire or to the hydro poles in their community. And so there still are ways, shine a blue light. Like there's all kinds of different things you can do to express, like, what if you're choosing now to use this symbol that has been shown over the course of a generation to be associated with white supremacy, white nationalism, Blue Lives Matter movements, other known problematic movements, then I think it's too late. Basically, it's a lot of words for. I guess I could have answered your question in really 3 words and said it's too late.
It's a podcast. We have to fill up the minutes, so it's all good. Yeah, yeah. There's no easy answer. I mean, I'm not naive enough to say, okay, Karl, you and I are going to solve this issue of reconciliation and white nationalism and white supremacy all within a half-hour discussion. That's not going to happen. But I know there are you talk to different people, and they nobody wants that feeling of racism, white supremacy. I think the majority of people honestly do not want that, but it's a matter of cultural impacts, I guess, feeding into our narratives. Like, for a majority of white people, like we have positive or no interaction with police services. Like, I just don't have to worry about police in my life really, unless I need them to come in. And I guess that's like kind of fundamentally is where like our two cultures are coming from. I know traditionally First Nations were heavily policed. I mean, we all know, like, the RCMP was originally founded really as a way to colonize for the First Nations land in this country. Like, it's and there's not really a question, but like that's kind of like the point of just where our two cultures are coming from. My interaction with police is on a temporary basis as needed. Yours is more of a permanent, it's almost part of like a lifestyle, and that's probably not the right word to use. I apologize for that now that it comes out, but it's just, I guess, like we're coming from two very different worlds on this matter. And I just wonder, like, where's the common ground here to kind of, how do we ensure that policing is fair and equitable for all people, that it really should be there on an as needed basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking at, if you look at what's happening in the city of Toronto, I think we both agree that Canada does not, in fact, revolve around what happens in the city of Toronto,
Yes.
despite what they may indicate at times. But if you look at the continuous raises to the police budget by a place like the city of Toronto as a remedy to there's now measurable increases in crime in the city, in gun violence in the city, in violent crime in the city, theft, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when you look at policing as the largest budget item, surpassing things like public housing and other social services and supports, I think there's math-based evidence that the extra 48 million or however much is going to go into the police budget in this next round of raises that police forces continuously get year after year after year after year, in spite of increasing crime. I think there's evidence to be made that, again, it's time to have, and I know this is unpopular in a lot of circles, but it's time to have discussions around defunding the police and what that should look like. And I think that those discussions should be based around the fact that, again, it's the police are never, they're never going to be part of a long-term solution to any problem that I'm looking to solve. When it comes to, and again, I want to pay tribute and respect to the fact that when there are terrible car accidents on the highways, and there are certain tragic events that happen, and police officers are charged with the task of walking towards the conflict. And so I never want to minimize that and the difficulty of that. And I do think that we need emergency response personnel that are most suited to that. But I think that I think the police have also done a fantastic job marketing themselves as solutions to problems that they're not really solving. Police are mostly reactive. And again, there's volumes and volumes and volumes of evidence of that. If something has been stolen, sure, you want a police officer to come and to catch the bad guy afterwards. And certain downtowns, like our own downtown association in St. Catharines, has been thankful for increased police patrols at times like New Year's Eve to protect businesses and to keep windows from getting smashed in and stuff. And we all even slow down when we're on the highway and we see a police officer on the side of the road. So there is a certain deterrence logic to police, but I also think like they are so expensive. Like they are just such here in Niagara, again, our largest single budget line item is for the police. And that's before public housing. And if you just flip those budgets and you just put the extra money that goes for police into public housing and took some people who are resorting to a life of crime because they don't have economic opportunity, like how much would you see that narrative changed? So I mean, you sort of frame the question, I think, about how can we come together on our perceptions of the police. And I don't know that I can ever truly meet you where you might be at in terms of the perceptions that you have around police right now. And also police are winning this argument. They're winning it. They're getting their increases. They're getting their supports. They get the media. If I had a nickel, I could probably go right now and open today's paper and find at least one or two stories that are basically just a reprint verbatim of something that came directly from a police service without any critical thought from a journalist or without any balance of perspectives. And it just happens all the time.
Well, there's something you said that just kind of flicked a switch in my head, was that the police are so reactive. And I think you might have just hit the nail on the head on that statement, is that we always call the police in after the fact, right? After a crime has been done, they're called in to investigate, build a case, prosecute, and all that. And when we hear statements like defund the police, I see the point in it. Like it does seem like an inefficient use of funds. We're talking about proactive solutions such as housing, proper mental and addiction services for those who are in need, rather than the reactive solution of, oh, I'm going to send the police into a violent situation where somebody is down in their luck, desperate, addicted to whatever, which makes the situation that much more violent and more worse. Whereas if we had a proactive solution, say, well, let's get the help to them now so that they're able to find a path into a more productive member of society. The police really are only called in for really those bad situations, the situation where regardless of whether you are non-white or white, you say, no, we need police to help control this situation. And I guess that's kind of where we get in with the police, that we're using a reactive solution for really what should be a proactive problem. And therein lies the problem. Like there's that friction of, we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole when we call the police for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it reflects a broader problem that we have in society at large. You and I had a little bit of a conversation off air before we hopped on, and sometimes there's an adversarial approach to how we solve a lot of things. We were talking about governance in particular, and you had this idea that if instead of political parties sitting across from each other, they sat in a circle in a more collaborative environment using Indigenous worldviews. I think that makes sense. So when it comes to the police, I really, again, I think that there are officers, and I have a radio show on 610 CKTB. I host The Drive regularly. I'm one of the rotating hosts. That's 2 to 6 p.m. on 610 CKTV in Niagara, in addition to One Dish One Mic Saturdays from 10 to noon. So there we go. There's my plugs for the different shows that I'm doing.
I'll expect the check in the mail.
Yeah, exactly. Bell Media, care of Karl Dockstader. But I got contacted by an officer, and I was making a point critical of the convoy and talking about the role of politicians in the convoy movement, and I was surprised that an officer texted into the show and took a position that was a little bit different than I thought an officer might take. And so I won't without the text right in front of me and without the information, it was just a really thoughtful text that reminded me that there's a diversity of viewpoints in any large occupation, including police officers, and I'll bet there are officers. As a matter of fact, I've talked to officers in Niagara that are dealing with people that are houseless, and that have the very difficult task of every single morning going through and putting band-aid solutions forward for the same people that are experiencing chronic, deep-rooted underlying problems. And therein lies the problem in our society, where we tend to gravitate towards leaders that are looking for simple solutions. I really I went hard on One Dish One Mic this past Saturday when I was talking about this issue. I went hard against Premier Ford and his comments. Initially, he gave condolences, and it was very thoughtful, and he put out a tweet that I thought was very, very appropriate. But then the next day, in a statement that the premier released to the press and others, he went on about the tragic killing of Constable Pierzchala, which is totally appropriate. But then he said it's the latest plea for the federal government to address the revolving door of violent criminals caused by our country's failed bail system. And he went on to say, too many innocent people have lost their lives at the hands of dangerous criminals who should have been behind bars, not on our streets. Enough is enough. Now take this case, and this is an awful case, and it was, it's in the courts, so it's all alleged to have happened. But there is alleged to have been an absolutely awful ambush that I think is reprehensible and fits the definition of some of this otherwise inflammatory language that the premier is using. But the revolving door of violent criminals has been a talking point of John Tory and of Premier Ford for long before this violent crime ever happened. I think it's terribly opportunistic to take this terrible tragedy and to spin it into these talking points that are also adversarial. More cops, more guns, more conflict, more violence, more mandatory minimum sentences, more courts, more bureaucracy, more systems, more money applied the way that we've been applying it obviously hasn't helped address the root issues that lead to a lot of crime. There are people that don't have what they need, and I think that's fundamentally at the root of why you have teenagers, 13-year-olds stealing vehicles in the Greater Toronto area as part of a broader crime ring. They're not bad. They're being conditioned by opportunity to do these things. Take away the need, and then you don't have 13-year-olds stealing vehicles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're getting into the criminology of bad behavior, like I think you're right. It's more complex than just saying, oh, they're just bad people. Because here's the thing: if it's a revolving door of people going in and getting out on the bail system, and they're going into commit crimes, why? Like that's not empirically, it's not the case. Like our cities are on the whole very safe to be in. They're very safe to walk around it. They are not these lawless ghettos of criminality, where you have like roving gangs of kids looking to pillage and plunder, unsuspecting white people. Because I'll be honest, it's the same rhetoric we heard in the States, right? For like during the 80s and the 90s, that was used against non-white communities. There are communities of violence and criminality, and you as a white person, you can't be trusted to go into those neighborhoods. And it does trouble me when I see that rhetoric kind of being mirrored here up in Canada. It's funny, like we use the term, it's a few bad apples, right? Like when police cross the line and we see an abuse of power, we always hear, oh, it's a few bad apples. We never talk about it could be an institutionalized, like their training, their conditioning, their funding, that kind of thing. We never talk about that. It's just, oh, it's a few bad apples. But it's never a few bad apples when this happens, when this officer was shot. It's never, well, that's just a really bad situation. Let's look into that situation. It's always, well, clearly it's a systemic problem. We're just letting all the bad actors out of jail on like weekend passes, and they make it sound like they walk into the Canadian Tire, pick up a gun, and they just shooting off willy-nilly into the air. that's not how it is. You're right. And I think that rhetoric just doesn't help the situation. It doesn't help us actually tackle these issues head on, where proper housing, proper education opportunities, proper, just, you're right, just opportunities for people to live better lives is really what we need. And that costs money. That takes money. It takes an investment of time and resources, and honestly a little bit of compassion and empathy to say to somebody, like, how do I make your life better? Which again comes back to the notion of, well, we'll have the police solve it, right? Oh, you're getting out of line, send in the police to bust heads, and that'll teach you, don't break the law and whatnot. So yeah, that does trouble me when I hear that rhetoric kind of being mirrored here in this country by conservative politicians.
Well, I want to seize on that point when you say this country, because that's something that I think you hit the nail on. That I think Canadians like to see themselves as more compassionate than Americans, and when it comes to understanding the complexity of houselessness and of the so-called revolving door of the failed bail system in Canada, I do think that Canadians have an understanding that if they choose to get as polarized as the Americans, the systems can break just like American systems have broken. Like the prison system in America is broken. I think the prison system in Canada is clearly broken as well, but in different ways. And so that's something that I just wanted to seize on that point, because I do think that while these problems are complex, and while people love the folksy premier of Ontario and his cheesecake recipes and everything else, and his quick punchy one-liners, he is a charismatic man. I've had opportunity to do some work around him, and he's got charm. But I hope that Canadians can appreciate it, and I have confidence that Canadians can appreciate that you and I can see things like the thin blue line differently. We can have a deep dive into the complexities of the. I do agree that the bail system has failed. I just disagree on the reasons that the Premier Ford is putting forward. But I think we have the space for these dialogues. I think it's what podcasting is great for, and shows like yours that take something that it's seemingly simple. The thin blue line, you just have two tweets that are, there's two people on either side of it, but it turns out there's this huge gray area of conversation that we need to discuss. So I'm grateful that you're doing it, but I wanted to seize particularly on the point that we have a test case of getting tougher on crime, and that test case is the United States of America. And if that's what Canadians want, then they're going to get something that looks a lot like a lot of the aggravated problems that Americans are struggling to deal with now.
Well, and you're right. I guess I just look south of the border, and like, as a society, it's a very segregated society. I mean, and I do mean that in the strictest sense of the word. I mean, it's not an official policy on paper, but you go through the states, and there are Black neighborhoods and there are white neighborhoods. There are Latino neighborhoods and Korean neighborhoods. Like their neighborhoods, they like to segregate and keep everything apart. And when that friction happens, when different cultures rub up against each other, it's, well, send in the cops and bust heads and keep order. But I don't see it's working. Like, I mean, when you have to privatize jails and prisons to just keep them in, the incentive just keep them full. I'm not sure that that's a society that we're willing to embrace. I think, kind of coming back to the notion of like reconciliation, what that means, and I'm worried about it becoming like a buzzword and just kind of a token word in our society as a whole, because it keeps coming back. But I do think there's something to be said about, in this situation, of just what does reconciliation means. And it's not a matter of this alleged perpetrator getting off scot-free because some kind of PC wokeness. It's about true justice happening here. A crime has been committed, justice will be served, justice will be done fairly and equitably, blindly, free from that. And that's where, like, this rhetoric doesn't help us. This rhetoric doesn't help us just say, like, look, let's approach this as a fair, equitable, and look for real justice to be done here. Because ultimately we all have to get along. Like, I know that this crime happened just on the border of the Six Nations you know, it's we need to kind of find a way to live coexist and live with each other in a harmonious way, you know, and not. And I find that that rhetoric just doesn't help us in this time. I don't know. It's cheap political points because I know Doug Ford's trying to use it to draw attention away from his controversies regarding completely unrelated matters. I'll give him that. And we know that Pierre Poilievre at the federal level, he's trying to capitalize. Well, I can be the tough on crime prime minister and make some hay against his political opponents. And I think that just cheapens the dialogue that needs to happen right now. It's that common humanity of a human being has died, wrongfully so. Let's all take a minute, regardless if we're Indigenous, Black, white, whatever, and just grieve for that. A human being has been taken away from us in the prime of their life. And then if we can have that empathy, can we share that with other situations when other members of different communities, when they lose their lives prematurely, to have that empathy and say, like, what happened here? How do we, and I'm not talking just in regards to police interactions. I mean, just in general, when a young Indigenous man or woman, Black man or woman, loses their life due to addiction, just poverty, anything of that nature, that we have that common humanity to say, like, what happened here? We need, could this have been avoided? And that rhetoric just kind of blocks that discussion from happening, or from us going down that path and having that hard conversation. And it's not going to be an easy answer. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And again, I really believe that there's a big appetite for that. Stephen Harper had a tough on crime political agenda, and it worked enough to get him, I think, the one majority, and then to string together a bunch of minority governments to keep him in office for a while. And then now the Liberals are kind of undoing a lot of that. I've worked in court. I was a court worker for 2 years, and then I was an executive director at a friendship center for 2 years that organized a justice program across 4 different friendship centers. And while it was my colleagues that did that legwork, it was still part of my responsibility to work directly with the program. And so that would be my challenge. So instead of presenting myself as some sort of an expert here, though I can qualify certain perspectives based on direct work experience, I would challenge people that have preconceived notions around crime and criminals and violent criminals and the broken bail system to spend some time in the courts. Our courts are public. Anybody can go right now, and especially now that it's post-COVID, you can go to your local courthouse, find out where the bail court is, and go and sit in there for a morning, sit in there for an entire morning, and hear the stories of the people that end up in the bail court on say a Monday morning after a long weekend. And there's jerks in there. There are people that I think need to learn some hard lessons. There are some, it may be a little judgy of me, but there's some people in there that I think are kind of losers and could make better decisions. But it's just been over the course of sitting in those bail courts for the course of several years, there are more people that have a lack of opportunity and are struggling and need help and need something better than again a very expensive court system. I think an inefficient system when it comes to lawyers and legal aid, and that whole process is a hot mess, and was, by the way, defunded arbitrarily by $60 million. One of the very first things that Doug Ford did was gut the legal aid service by tens of millions of dollars. So it's a little disingenuous, again, for the premier to go, oh, the bail system's broken. But meanwhile, you've taken away one of the most powerful tools that people have to help themselves early on in the court process, which is duty counsel, which is properly publicly funded counselors, lawyers that can guide people in the right direction. So again, we're fooling ourselves when we think there's simple solutions to complex problems.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and that's, I thought, and that's kind of bringing this conversation back full circle, is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. That simple statement of this symbol, the thin blue line symbol, it drives fear into the communities that ultimately the police are supposed to go in and serve. They're there to serve these communities is on paper. And what kind of gave me hope in that situation was the fact that the Halton PD did take it down. I do think we have to give the Halton PD a lot of credit to say, yeah, I think they posted it in a sense of love and respect for Officer Pierzchala, but to say, yeah, but there's a big segment of the population that look at that and say, okay, what's going on here? Are you coming for me next? And for them to say, no, that wasn't our intent. We're sorry, and they took it down. I saw that as a almost as an olive branch. Say, yeah, we know we need to reach out to these communities, because I know for a fact that the Halton police are working to reach out to minority communities in Halton. And I think they realize, like, yeah, we think it means something, but the impact is different, and we need to recognize that. And so, was it a clumsy process? Yeah, clearly. But I do again, I think there's hope coming out of this. That it's not a question of political correctness. It's a matter of they understand we need to serve these communities, and we need to build relationships with these communities. And we can't do that for saying we matter more than you, which is what I'm hearing is kind of like that's what the symbol means to these communities. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a complex discussion that is not going to be solved in a half-hour podcast conversation, but I think it's one that I hope we can continue to have in a good way, if there is such a way. But I also hope that if people are listening to this, they can have that kind of conversation and have those meaningful conversations with people in their lives. I guess I leave this question to you. For the police services, the OPP, who have not had the greatest record of cooperation with First Nations in this province, what in your mind could they do to have a proper relationship, a relationship equality and respect with the First Nations communities, not just the Six Nations Reserve, but those who are living inside our communities, Hamilton, Burlington, St. Catharines, Niagara, and Toronto. What would you, as a First Nations individual, want to see the police do to put yourself at ease?
I can make it easy, because unfortunately Dudley George lost his life at the hands of OPP officers who, I mean, there were just actually Kim Wheeler and Karen Pugliese do a fantastic job unpacking what happened at Ipperwash as part of Canada Land Back, which they did a 2-episode special on. So they talk about it, but I actually studied this when I was going to go work in the courts, and understanding that the police have an arm's length relationship with the Crown by necessity, and I think they do that well for the most part. But I would say read the Ipperwash inquiry findings, and pick the parts that are most appropriate to where you think that would apply to your job as an officer, or if you're in a leadership role with the police service or police force. I read he's non-Indigenous, but he was the executive director of Aboriginal Legal Services, and Jonathan Rudin wrote I think it's like a 70-page report. So it's a little bit on the lengthy side, but it's publicly available. It's easy enough to get, and I would read Jonathan Rudin's report on the Ipperwash inquiry, that talks about the history of policing, the state of policing, the problems that led to Dudley George being killed by police officers, and then some suggestions on what could be done afterwards. So I think there's a pretty straightforward set of solutions in there. On the most basic level, there's 2 things that happen with police services. When Indigenous people call, police officers either don't come as quickly as they should, or they don't take the crimes as seriously, or there's systemic factors at play, such as our friends in the Cree community that unfortunately had the stabbing incident, and the police weren't. There was a mix of, they were slow to respond, but there also was the reality of urban policing is very different than something you and I have to deal with, Joel. But either way, police have a reputation for responding slower to our concerns when we're the victims, and quicker to our concerns when we're deemed to have been the perpetrators. And again, I think there's empirical evidence that backs that up. And it's not just an opinion. You can find that there's evidence of that happening time and time again. There's complicated systemic factors why that happens, but either way, the onus is on the police to figure out how to solve that portion of it. So read the Upperwash inquiry. Understand how to build those relationships with First Nations peoples in your community. You do have an Indigenous Services Friendship Center in the 905 area, Peel Indigenous Services Friendship Center. We have Niagara Regional Native Center and the Fort Erie Native Friendship Center, my home community, Hamilton Friendship Center. There's 2 friendship centers in Toronto. So depending on where people are listening to your podcast right now, if there's officers listening, if they're still listening at this point, first off, thank you for checking out the show and for being patient with me challenging some of your perceptions. But then on a secondary basis, if you don't have a relationship with your friendship center or your chapter of Native women or other Indigenous organizations in your community, build that relationship. Find a way to build that bridge of friendship, because again, I can get as mad as I want at policing as an institution. It's harder for me when an officer is standing in front of me, especially if they're willing to have a frank conversation, to reject some of their standpoints, and especially if they're listening and we're listening to each other. So those are a couple suggestions on how to bridge that gap in a good way.
Yeah. You know what? I think we'll have to leave it at that for this episode. But again, this isn't a situation that's going away anytime soon. So I suspect we might be seeing this in the future as well. But I hope that I hope we're on the path to a better place for both for everyone involved. I should say. Thanks very much, Karl, for coming on to the podcast today, and we'll see about getting that jacket on your 5th time around.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, and I'm a medium slim fit, just so you know. So just talk to your tailor. Honestly, Joel, thanks for thinking of me.
Thank you very much. Take care.
All right, thanks.